This incident occurred on Halloween in 2008 when I was just 14 years old. I remember feeling exceptionally excited about that year's Halloween because it happened to fall on a Friday, which meant we could stay out later than usual. I had planned to go trick-or-treating with my friend Matthew, and afterward, he would come over for a sleepover. I lived with my dad, who worked night shifts as a security guard, so he would be gone from sundown to sunup, leaving Matthew and me to enjoy the evening. Matthew arrived at around 7 p.m., and without wasting any time, we hastily donned some budget-friendly costumes and set out for our trick-or-treating adventure. Our neighborhood wasn't the best for this activity, as we lived in a sparsely populated forested area where houses were widely spaced apart. We had to walk quite a distance between each door. However, the homeowners seemed to acknowledge this and often gave us more candy to make up for the inconvenience. While we encountered other trick-or-treaters on our journey, there weren't as many as one might expect, given the limited number of kids in the area. After about 2 hours of trick-or-treating, I noticed someone trailing behind us. It was either a grown man or an unusually tall kid, and he was wearing a Michael Myers mask that concealed his face. Initially, I assumed he was just another trick-or-treater, but I soon realized that he lacked a candy bag, and he was alone. It wasn't like he was accompanying a child. I informed Matthew about this strange follower, but he was keen on continuing our candy quest and assured me that if the guy persisted, we could head back. Sure enough, the guy continued to shadow us, and I sensed that Matthew was growing increasingly uneasy. We approached the shortcut through the woods that led directly to my house, and we wasted no time in sprinting through it. We had no idea if the mysterious figure was still tailing us, but we immediately secured all doors and windows upon entering my home. While I was upstairs locking my bedroom window, I suddenly heard shouting from downstairs. It was Matthew, standing near the living room window. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't utter a word. Instead, he pointed outside. I squinted through the darkness and saw the silhouette of a figure standing amidst the trees. It was the man in the Michael Myers mask. Initially, I suspected that Matthew was trying to scare me, but when I looked back, I saw him too. He was deep in the forest, partially concealed by a tree, motionless. I hurried to the kitchen to grab the phone and call my dad. As I described the stranger in the Michael Myers mask watching our house, my dad suggested it might be a teenager attempting to frighten us. He advised us to ensure all the doors were locked and to ignore him. It wasn't the response I had hoped for, but I considered the possibility that my dad might be right. Matthew and I went back upstairs to my room, but we couldn't shake off the unease. We began brainstorming logical explanations for the situation when suddenly we heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. Our hearts raced as we remained in the dark. Without hesitation, we switched off the lights and hid in the closet, wedging ourselves behind the hanging clothes. For the next 5 minutes, silence enveloped us until we heard footsteps entering the room. The intruder started moving around, and my heart raced even faster. Then, the closet door began to open slowly. A minute that felt like an eternity passed before Matthew broke the silence with a scream. I was pulled out of the closet from right beside me, and there stood the man in the Michael Myers mask, now wielding a knife. Matthew and the intruder wrestled, but in the struggle, the assailant dropped his knife. Within seconds, Matthew was pinned down, and I seized the knife, plunging it into the man's thigh. He cried out in pain, and Matthew managed to get up. We rushed downstairs and sprinted outside to my neighbor's house. Upon reaching their door, we pounded on it until they answered. We explained our terrifying ordeal, and they let us inside while they called the police. To condense a lengthy story, the police couldn't locate the intruder. He had vanished from the scene before their arrival. All that remained were a shattered window and a missing kitchen knife. Despite searching for a blood trail, they found nothing. Fortunately, I sustained no injuries, but Matthew had not been as fortunate. He had a cut on his arm. Even today, I can't help but think about that horrifying night. At the age of 19, I resided in my parental home. This particular incident took place on Halloween, and as was our yearly tradition, my parents assigned me the task of distributing candy to the trick-or-treaters who visited. I didn't mind this responsibility since our living room was conveniently located next to the front door. I decided to put on a movie and would simply pause it whenever the doorbell rang. It was around 10 p.m., and the doorbell chimes were gradually diminishing. Both of my parents had retired to bed by this point. The memory of this night remains vivid in my mind. I was engrossed in the final scene of The Dark Knight when our home phone unexpectedly rang. My gaze shifted towards the phone, which displayed unknown caller. This struck me as odd because just recently we had acquired a new set of phones, and we hadn't shared our new number with anyone yet, so it was highly unlikely that I knew the caller. Nonetheless, I decided to answer it, just in case. I picked up the receiver and greeted, "Hello." However, all I could hear on the other end was heavy, eerie breathing. Without hesitation, I hung up, thinking it might be a prank call. Shortly after, the phone rang again, displaying the same enigmatic unknown caller label. Reluctantly, I picked it up once more, inquiring, "Who is this?" This time, a male voice responded, but the words were fleeting, and I struggled to recall them. It was something along the lines of the person being outside our house and requesting me to unlock the back door for him. He issued a sinister warning that if we contacted the authorities, he would harm everyone inside before they could intervene. Then, abruptly, the line went dead. By this point, my conviction that this was a mere prank call had waned. It was Halloween night, and while prank calls were expected, they were typically the antics of children, or, at most, teenagers. However, the voice on the other end sounded much older than that. Over the next 10 minutes, the phone rang 6 or 7 more times. Frustrated and anxious, I finally answered once more, this time choosing to remain silent. After a brief silence, the same man began to speak again. To be honest, I can't recall his exact words, but it was something along the lines of him being outside our house and needing access through the back door. At this point, my fear was escalating, and I decided to take action. Halloween or not, this was no ordinary prank. With the largest knife I could find in hand, I cautiously crawled to my parents' room and woke up my father. In a hushed tone, I informed him that someone was lurking near the back door. Without hesitation, my father sprang out of bed and retrieved his loaded revolver. We silently moved through the house, and I explained the unsettling phone calls to him. When we reached the back door, my father unlocked it and stepped outside, firing a warning shot into the air. Just as he did so, 3 men emerged from a cluster of bushes right against the house, attempting to flee. They sprinted into the adjacent forest, which our house backed up to. My father pursued them briefly, but the intruders were much swifter. They vanished into the dense foliage, and we never saw them again. To this day, we remain clueless about their identities, how they obtained our phone number, or what their intentions were. We reported the incident to the police, but unfortunately, there was little they could do to unravel the mystery. Last year, on Halloween, I was 18 years old, and my best friend, Michael, was 17. Even though we were aware that we were probably too old for trick-or-treating, we couldn't bear the thought of a candyless Halloween. That's when Michael had a brilliant idea. There was an old, abandoned house near mine that we had always talked about exploring. We decided that Halloween night was the perfect time for our adventure. We patiently waited until darkness had fallen, and the number of trick-or-treaters outside dwindled. Armed with a couple of flashlights, we set out on our journey. It took us a few minutes, but we eventually reached the decrepit house. As expected, it was in disarray, with trash strewn across the floor and boarded-up windows. We cautiously entered, half expecting the front door to be locked. To our surprise, it creaked open easily. Inside, the darkness was oppressive, and our flashlights illuminated only a fraction of our surroundings. We explored the entire ground floor, but found nothing of interest. So we decided to venture upstairs. Upstairs, we immediately noticed two rooms. Michael entered the room on the right, while I entered the one on the left. I began rummaging through drawers and inspecting the closet, but I found nothing remarkable. My attention shifted to the window when I suddenly heard blood-curdling screams emanating from the other room. It was Michael. I rushed into the room and initially saw nothing unusual. That changed when I aimed my flashlight towards the back left corner. There, I spotted Michael, but he had an arm around his neck. A person dressed in all black, with a Halloween mask, had Michael in a chokehold. I could see that Michael's face was turning red as he struggled to breathe. In a desperate move, I hurled my flashlight at the assailant with all my strength, hitting him in the side. He let go of Michael, crying out in pain, and we were left in complete darkness. We raced downstairs and stumbled out of the house in the pitch-black night. As we fled, we glanced back and saw three figures standing in the upstairs window, all wearing the same eerie Halloween masks. Lit only by the moonlight, it sent shivers down our spines. We didn't stop until we reached my driveway, both of us panting heavily. We were left in shock, not knowing how to process what had just transpired. We couldn't fathom the gravity of the situation. Later that night, Michael recounted his experience in that room. He had entered, casually exploring like the other rooms, but then he noticed something in the corner, a Halloween mask. As he approached it, thinking it was propped up against the wall, it moved slightly. That's when he realized it wasn't an inanimate object. It was a person. He screamed, but he was swiftly silenced by a chokehold that left him gasping for breath. The most disturbing part was how Michael described the intensity of the chokehold. It was as if the person in the mask had exerted all their force on his neck. It wasn't just restraint. He genuinely couldn't breathe for about 20 agonizing seconds. We still don't know what we stumbled upon that night, but we both agree that it was something we were not supposed to witness. I firmly believe that we narrowly escaped a deadly encounter.